Hello, I'm Satish Rao, and I'm the Chief Product Officer at Newlab. At Newlab, we support communities of engineers and entrepreneurs working to build early-stage frontier tech-focused ventures. At the same time, we at Newlab also partner with industry and government leaders to apply those technologies to things that matter in areas such as ag, resilient cities, mobility and transportation, and sustainability in mining and energy. The story of Newlab is very much tied to the story of the space, and this is where 175 of our Newlab member companies reside in this 84,000 square foot space that was formerly a shipbuilding facility. The history of the building was in the late 1800s to mid 1900s. This building built a lot of the US naval warships. And that history of smart factory and smart manufacturing has resonated to today, where today 175 member companies build transformative technologies based on advanced sensors, robotics, bio-advanced materials, you name it, all happening here at Newlab, where they can collaborate, where they can prototype with our on-site facilities, and really develop products that are ready to create a great impact in the world. One of our longest standing members is Marcel Botta, the founder of 10xBeta. And I want to turn to Marcel now to tell us his story.
Good morning, everyone. So let me start by telling a little bit about the history of 10xBeta. We were founded just under 11 years ago during New York City. I came out of multiple sort of early stage hardware ventures and wanted something that would really capture that essence of early stage beta hardware products, but build a team that would evolve and grow over time to not just do one product, but many over time. At that moment in time, we weren't thinking about something that would be an agency. We were really thinking about just a think tank approach to creating multiple hardware ventures simultaneously so that we could optimize our resources. Over time, we've touched about 120 plus products. Many of them who've gone to market. We've partnered with entrepreneurs that were sort of single ideas and napkin sketches all the way to corporate ventures throughout the world. And it's been a very exciting sort of history over the last 10 years, and it's been intrinsically sort of intertwined with Newlab and Newlab's growth over the last, I want to say, almost 8 years, from the Newlab beta space into the current Newlab primary space where we find ourselves today.
And Marcel, you were obviously one of the first people I met when I joined Newlab about 2.5 years ago. And what I've seen across the history of your projects is there's always some interesting technology element involved. And so when you think about advanced tech or transformative tech in terms of generating these positive impacts in the industries and sectors you work in, is technology where you start? Like, how do you think about that when you're applying these types of technologies to your problem sets?
I think we have, there's no formula which is correct or absolute or correct. There's sometimes we identify a latent need or a problem set that needs to be addressed, and we would go into our toolbox of known technologies and to our academic network of research that's being done into future technologies that might be applied to that one problem set. And then we also flip that around where we have deep experience in connected devices, robotics, mobility products, and we then see how some of those product evolutions and technology evolutions over time start opening up new product categories. Specifically, over the last few years in healthcare for connected drug delivery, drug security, drug adherence, pulmonary technology applications, making it simpler and easier to bring new products to market because of that understanding of where the technology is, where it came from, and where it's going in the future.
And so that idea is something that I've noticed too, working with corporate and government partners. Do you oftentimes, how do you manage partners that perhaps have a misunderstanding of what the capabilities are of technologies today? Are the goals too lofty? Are they misunderstanding what is actually possible? How does that conversation usually start when you're looking at solving a problem with a partner?
It's actually quite incredible what we can achieve as a society today with existing technologies. The quality of products we can build, the sky is the limit. However, you have to sort of see how it relates to the economics of that product and how it will fit into a world that still needs to be economically compliant in terms of the types of products that we build. Every product we build is not a rocket ship with a multi-$100 million budget. And then you have to look at the user experience of how this technology, known, new, or old, relates to a user experience where it needs to reshape our interaction with that technology. You know, the iPod story is well known, and it was music players weren't new, but how we interacted with them was new, and the platform that supported it was new. So we are definitely looking, you know, at historical examples of how to influence the conversation with clients to you know, we've been at it for long enough that connected devices is now a historical footnote. And we've been doing IoT products since 2004 at MIT. And we're at this point where we can reference things that worked, didn't work. And most of the time, it's not a technology limitation. It's a user experience and economics or business model limitation. So we try and interweave all of those, that thinking in the conversations with clients to find a good fit as we endeavor to commercialize new technologies. Because if you, as a hardware ecosystem, if you're not bringing products to market at a speed, you know, similar to software publishing, then you are likely going to be left behind.
Mm-hmm. And some of those challenges, I think, are definitely true with the Fortune 500 clients you've worked with, and we see the same thing as well in our studio partnerships. But increasingly, you've been working with founders and early stage ventures and helping them develop their products as well, and even in some cases, almost pre-launch. Some of those challenges you just mentioned, I think, are what a founder deals with. So what are some of the patterns you notice when you're thinking about founders trying to use technologies to develop products at a high speed? What are some common challenges you've seen there with founders you've worked with?
You know, as with any company, if you want to get the venture backing, if you want to build a credible commercial operation, you need a team. The biggest challenge, and this is a challenge that sometimes we ignore as well when we do early stage venture exploration, is that if you don't have a credible team, you yourself might be credible as an individual, but without a team, you're likely not going to scale the technology or the commercial operations of that team. Neither will you get funding. It's very important to understand the importance of team building and talent acquisition early on in the process relative to the technology that you're trying to spin out. It's also very, you know, we're seeing this now as the Internet of Things goes through, you know, multiple rounds of maturity every few years with miniaturization of technology, with IP that was filed in the early 2000s and even in the 90s on wearable computing expiring, that you do need to educate yourself as an early stage founder into what's real, what's patented, what's no longer patentable, even no matter how cool you think it is, and what potentially can you go and license or acquire at an early stage for very little money to bolster your patent portfolio if you are going to go down this path. We see, you know, it's common knowledge that unrealized IP is abundant, and I think that we, as early stage founders, and I've done this myself too, you're always super impressed with your idea and how novel it may be. I take a different approach, an ideas are cheap approach, that no one cares about your beta product. What is your business? And how are you going to commercialize it?
Super interesting. Yeah, I think some of those, I speak to some of those as well when we're working with startups that are trying to engage with our corporate partners. I think part of this, I think, you know, I'd like to turn to you as well. I mean, of course, you're a founder yourself with 10xBeta and starting that, and now some of the new entities that you spun out of your outfit based on, as you mentioned, IP that might have been sitting on a shelf or a problem you saw in the marketplace. So maybe you can share a bit more personally, like some of the challenges you've gone through, maybe from a tech perspective, also just from a company building perspective, getting 10xBeta off the ground and at the point where it is today. And I guess also like how you've learned from that in some of the new ventures you've been involved with.
Yes, I mean, 10xBeta is 11 years old and still feels like a startup. But we are constantly pushing out new technology companies. You know, Valados, the Indigo under 10x Motion. We have some drug delivery for pill dispensing coming down the pipe. There's some viral testing that's coming down from the lab. We have there's an incredible amount of opportunities that we evaluate on a weekly basis with founders, with our internal team, and with larger partners. And the challenge is really to de-risk your exploration, your technology, your technology validation and development step, that first step, by finding partners that can help you scale and that can help you think about scaling opportunities even before you start investing the money to go down a path. We have in our drug delivery explorations over the last 12 years, even before 10xBeta, I was involved in a couple of diabetes adherence products. And you have, most hardware startups, you have to do a lot of work before you can convince an investor to give you money. And that work is not free. So you have to really pace yourself. And we're learning still every day, what is a better mechanism to create technology validation mechanisms and processes to make it cheaper or more strategically effective to validate new technologies as we explore those relative to those user experiences that may activate new business models in the world.
Mm-hmm. So if you're, if you're a founder and you're looking at, let's say, existing technology, or you know that there's some really advanced tech that's needed to solve this problem, but I see the business, how do you think, how do you pull, let's say, support from a community or from a network? How have you done this in the past? And of course, this is going to lead into how you've leveraged sort of the Newlab experience as well.
Yes, I mean, I think, 10xBeta, I like to say that we have 4 layers, right? We have our product management and product development in-house. And we do all our sort of engineering and validation and prototyping here to verify and validate technologies, and then take them through the product development steps to get them in a pre-commercialization state. I'm receiving a call. I should put myself on do not disturb. Sorry, guys. Okay, and then we have the next layer is a specialist layer, and this is basically how we activate technologies beyond our team's daily expertise or recourse. We have this vast network of academics, professionals, and advisors. I would say global, but it's definitely North American heavy, where we rely on our academic partners, that people that went to grad school with us, people that we've worked with in the past, people who are specialists in their own fields, to come in, and we built these really, sometimes exotic teams to solve very hard problems. We looked at the future, projects in the future of sound technology, or future of hearing, projects in the future of pulmonary technology, in the middle, or very current challenges like the Spiro ventilator that we worked on. Those projects would have never come to light if it was just my team and I that had to deliver those. We're very grateful for the network of friends and talent and partners that we've built over the last 20 years of doing early stage product companies and 10xBeta that we can leverage on a daily basis to ask advice for. And Newlab has formalized a space in New York City that I worked in hardware in New York City prior to Newlab coming into existence, but never had I experienced something so effective in terms of a space where I can ask advice of fellow founders, fellow engineers, people who've done the same hard products in a different way. I can ask them about their successes. I can ask them about their failures. I can ask them for advice. And I think that having access to 900 plus people, whether it's on Slack or in person, less so in person today than it was in 2019, but it's a strong community, and it's growing every year. And I think that it has become one of the epicenters for hardware innovation in New York City.
Yeah, I agree with you. And the growth of it over the past few years has been incredible. And I think 10xBeta plays a really important role and can continue to play a really important role in the growth of an early stage venture, because not always is it capital efficient to hire your own engineering teams and necessarily build that vision from the product and sort of design side. And so I know there are specific stories. I'd love to hear a few from you in terms of your interactions with the community at Newlab and Newlab as well as a company. We know SpiroWave is a great example. Maybe we can start with that, but some other examples of 10xBeta partnering with some of the other startups here in our community.
Sure, yeah, I mean, we've had some really great collaborations on the Newlab floor. We have, let's start with SpiroWave. About February last year, Manuel Toscano emailed us and said, if what happens to Italy happens in New York, we need a solution. Manuel is Italian. He was living in Amsterdam at the time, and he's one of our business partners for one of our children's product ventures. And he really pushed us to start looking actively at how we might contribute, and we, Newlab, 10x, and other members of the community. We found research at MIT that was being re-evaluated 10 years later. It came from 2010 from the mechanical engineering lab of Alex Slocum, and that was being revalidated and upgraded to align with modern technology. Many things happened in 10 years since that research was done in his lab, and we were able to partner with that lab at MIT to work on 3 different iterations of ventilators for the world. Open source ventilators, low-cost ventilators, and rapidly deployed ventilators for New York City. SpiroWave stemmed from that research engagement, and within 30 days, we were able to get an EUA approval. That would have not been done if we could start building a team of talent at the beginning of that process. We were able to leverage 10 years of expertise and friends and network and financial resources to get access to the best fabrication, R&D, engineering, software, and management talent in the city overnight. So Boyce Technologies, 10xBeta, and Newlab partnered on delivering 3,000 ventilators to New York City. And of all the EUA approvals that were given, this was one of the few that delivered at scale. And the problem with, innovating in a vacuum is that if you make a ventilator and get EUA approval, but you don't deliver it at a scale that it was needed at that moment in time, then what is the actual contribution? Is it just to pat yourself on the back because you got an EUA? And I think it's very, very hard to contribute under duress. But we managed to do that. The only reason we got to do that was because of the Newlab community and its extended network. Looking at more consumer-facing products, Clip Bikes, for instance, is a long-term collaborator and client of us. We also invested in their company. It turns any bicycle into an electric bicycle with a very smart electric attachment to the front wheel. And we can't wait to drive the final product. It's now going into its final production readiness stage. And that was an amazing collaboration where we tested and validated and engineered multiple mechanisms to get to that very sophisticated final product. We believe that we would love to see that be a global product one day, able to support both Brooklyn hipsters and our friends, all the way to low-cost applications in emerging markets. Another example is Norbert, very sophisticated team on the software and hardware side. They've built a lot of products themselves. We partnered with them on doing an elderly care application, which pivoted to a COVID application mid-pandemic. And we went through that pivot with them, and they took that over and are now successfully rolling product out throughout the country. So we have another example would be Link. Link started as a consumer or B2C company with a direct-to-consumer product for tracking your friends or some small to medium-sized groups up to 12 people in social locations. And they have now evolved to be a much bigger opportunity than that, with a combination of hardware, integrated hardware, and software as they build that company out. And the list goes on. I mean, we've had many collaborations on the floor, and they've all been successful.
Yeah, and there's many stories just like that happening across the community, and I think Newlab does a great job of sort of fostering those collaborations, either bespoke as we see them come through the community or through our Innovation Studio programming as well. Norbert and Clip, those are great mentions. We actually featured them yesterday with our Chief Marketing Officer, Lynn Fisher, and so viewers can look at that and try and find those videos. From an investor perspective, when a Norbert or a Clip approaches a 10xBeta to help them build their product, how do you think that's viewed by investors? Is that mostly favorable, or do you think investors might push back at the thought of bringing an external party to build a product that's supposed to be the vision of the founders? How do you see investors interpreting that?
I think 15 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, when we were raising money for our first hardware ventures, all the VCs were excited to invest in a hardware team that was all internal, and all the tech and the knowledge and the talent is encapsulated in the entity that they're invested in. What we see now, though, is that It depends on what kind of product you're building. Are you doing primary research that you're commercializing over time? Do you have an R&D wing to your startup that just does patent fencing? It depends what your strategy is for on how you want to invest in hardware. With the majority of software focused yet hardware enabled companies, the hardware becomes commoditized once you've done it correctly. And the cost of doing it incorrectly means that your software business doesn't start scaling. So we see with a lot of businesses that are being referred to us even by VCs that are funding them, if the business model focuses on software as the primary objective long term, the hardware becomes commoditized, and it's okay for that team to get support from outside specialists, which is where we fall in. We there are companies that we partner with where we form the early R&D and hardware team, and they are still hardware focused, and they'll take over from us as they build their team. Talent acquisition is one of the hardest things in a positive economy. So up until the moment that we locked down for COVID, it was really hard to find talented people that you would want to put on your cap table as long-term employees of your startup. So we also played a role where we were augmenting early stage hardware development for hardware focused companies while they were team building and fundraising. So it was a talent de-risking step for that matter. And I think what we also bring to the table is the know-how, historical network to execute any of these products. From napkin sketch to manufacturing, and also the ability to go at extremely high speed. Another Newlab member that's highly successful and are now part of the other campus, Strong Arm Technologies. We developed with them their current product line in 10 weeks. That was one of the fastest products we ever did before we did Spiro.
Yeah, and Spiro, and so I think everything you said is absolutely true, especially the historical context. I like the way you put it 15 years ago. It was different. I think that has changed, especially in the tech side of the industry, right? We know that tech changes a lot faster now than it did 15 years ago. And so if you're an investor, perhaps you're looking at this as more of what's the business milestones I need to reach. And if a 10xBeta can help you get there more quickly, then that today is probably the best approach. When you're thinking, and so now if we jump into more of a topic on the medical side, I know 10xBeta, of course, with Spiro and other ventures, you're moving more into this space as a very strong medical device designer and product builder. And so all the elements you just mentioned, how do you think that translates now to the medical side in terms of speed to market, the need for tech and design? Maybe you could speak a bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the early days of doing medtech, I was almost disillusioned by how slow everything went. And then really realizing that big medtech and big pharma are never going to move at the speed that we are moving at. But as I matured my thinking around that, I realized that you have to build in medtech, specifically in the spaces that we are working in. There's no quick exit from a medical technology. You have to develop the product and prove product market fit, and ideally have first customers to get to a point of acquisition. And you have to, while keeping that in mind, start driving early on to understand who your potential customers, acquirers, and joint venture partners might be. Because in some cases, the same company may present great opportunities in all three of those outcomes. But what we have seen, which is really exciting right now, is the combination of cost reduction, miniaturization, computational performance increase, the ability to design way more sophisticated IoT-style medical devices today than we were able to do 3 years, 6 years, and 9 years ago, or even 15 years ago when we did our first IoT product. It really inspires us to really think about how may these technologies be applied to society's biggest problems worldwide, starting with the US. How do we deal with addiction? How do we deal with the opioid crisis? How do we improve access, at-home access for drug delivery of high risk and potentially addictive drugs or high cost drugs? How do we improve adherence for long-term use drugs in for diabetes care? How do we make, with low-cost hardware that enables a software approach, how do we make the patient's life better, and how do we improve those patient outcomes without making it all about the hardware? To us, the hardware has become completely commoditized and easy to execute on. Now we're focused on how does the technology evolve over time and improve that user experience for the patient. So everything we do in terms of hardware development for drug delivery, for instance, is focused on that user experience outcome. How do we make all four stakeholders, all four primary stakeholders, from the payers to the providers to the patient and the pharma, how do we make them all play much more effectively together versus having this natural tension between all of them, historically, especially with drug delivery?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I think there's a lot of white space in sort of the health market in general, where it's existing tech, it's commercially available technologies, it's low cost hardware as you described, that can really be this tying force to exactly this sort of broken up or siloed ecosystem that we have health in today. So I think it's a really good point. In terms of Newlab, certainly we're growing into that part of the community in terms of medtech startups. There's a lot of real work happening here. You just saw someone walk by with a hard hat that wasn't staged. That actually happens here. In terms of medtech, how do you think those types of companies can benefit by being part of our community as well?
Yes, I mean, I think my 10xBeta personally, but also 10xBeta Newlab, we definitely doubling down on our medtech investments in this community, both in how our team supports other medtech products on the floor, us spinning out into Newlab some of our medtech companies around drug delivery, pulmonary technologies, as well as testing technologies so I think that with our academic networks and our hospital, clinical and teaching hospital relationships, we definitely see a big investment over the next 5 years in building out that ecosystem within Newlab to support more and more medtech ecosystem development within the building. It was very much ad hoc up until this point. And then what Spiro taught us all is that, listen, if we partner on on the world's biggest healthcare challenges, and throw our hats in the ring to contribute much more effectively as a group, not just 10x, but as a community year, we probably can move the needle on some really big challenges very quickly and have a much more favorable outcome for the world at large.
Yeah, and I'm seeing, on our side at the Newlab, as we work with industry and government partners across the world, they really are taking notice at sort of these tectonic changes in sustainability and energy and carbon footprint and in health of their communities, resilience in their cities. And I think they're all really noticing how technology can play a role, and not just new technology, but ones that are already available that perhaps need to be pivoted to new applications. And so never been a better time, I think, to be running an early stage company, especially if you're going after a large impact challenge like the ones we discussed today. And so we at Newlab are excited to work with you, and so feel free to reach out. And Marcel, I'll leave last words for you to the tech builders out there in the world listening today.
Yes, I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges over the last year has been, how antisocial and video friendly only the world has been. But our doors are always open to give advice, to evaluate new ideas, and we're hoping to set up a platform or at least some space to interact with all the Newlab collaborators and potential collaborators.
Well, great, Marcel. Thank you. Appreciate it. I feel like we can keep going. That was like you and I speaking at the coffee table pretty much, but I appreciate your time, and thank you everyone for listening.